The air at Blackheath does not merely chill, it whispers of things best left buried. To the world, Cassandra and Gideon are but two strangers bound by the eccentricities of a dead woman's will. But within the walls of a manor filled with preserved oddities and ink-stained secrets, they will discover that the most dangerous inheritance is not gold or land. It is the truth of who they are, and the fire that ignites when two lonely souls find their match in the dark. If you find yourself lost in this tale of fire and truth, subscribe for the next chapter. Tell us in the comments, would you choose duty or desire? The carriage wheels groaned against the sludge of the driveway, a sound like grinding teeth. Cassandra Effington pressed her gloved hand against the cold glass, peering through the torrential Yorkshire rain at the silhouette of Blackheath. It was a jagged, sprawling beast of a house, more stone than soul, perched on the edge of a moor that seemed to want to swallow it whole. Her late Aunt Hester had always been spirited, the family's polite euphemism for a woman who preferred the company of beetles and star charts to the drawing rooms of Mayfair. But as the carriage jerked to a halt, Cassandra felt a shiver that had nothing to do with the draught. She was 24, unmarried by choice, and now, if the solicitors were to be believed, the mistress of a house she had never visited, sharing it with a man she had never met. "Welcome to Blackheath, Miss Effington. You are late."
The voice was a low, gravelly baritone that cut through the thunder. Standing beneath the dripping portico was a man who looked less like a gentleman and more like a storm personified. Gideon Rokesby did not offer a hand to help her down. He merely stood with his arms crossed over a broad chest, encased in a waistcoat that had seen better decades. His dark hair was wind-whipped, and his eyes, a piercing, sceptical grey, swept over her silk travelling cloak with an air of assessment that bordered on disdain. "The roads are washed out, Mr. Rokesby," Cassandra replied, stepping down and nearly losing her footing in the mud. She caught herself, chin tilting upward. "And I believe the greeting you were looking for was good evening." "I find little good in a relation appearing on my doorstep to claim a share of a life she never acknowledged while Hester lived," he snapped. He turned on his heel, the heavy oak door swinging open to reveal a foyer that smelled of old paper, dust, and something faintly metallic. "Follow me. Try not to trip over the specimens." Cassandra bristled, her pulse quickening with a mixture of indignation and an involuntary spark of interest. Gideon Rokesby was, by all accounts, Hester's ward, a natural philosopher, and, if rumour held true, a man of temper. As she stepped inside, the breath caught in her throat. This was not a home, it was a cathedral to the macabre. The walls were lined with glass-fronted cabinets. Instead of fine china, they held jars of spirits containing creatures with too many limbs. Sketches of skeletal hands in celestial alignments were pinned over the damask wallpaper like a frantic map of the universe. In the centre of the hall stood a stuffed peacock, its iridescent feathers dull with dust, its glass eyes seemingly tracking her every move.
"My aunt was quite thorough," Cassandra managed, her voice echoing in the cavernous space. "She was a genius," Gideon said, his voice softening for a fleeting second before the hardness returned. He stopped at a heavy mahogany table littered with charcoal pencils and papers. "She spent 20 years cataloguing the variations of nature, and I spent 10 of them assisting her. Then you arrive, with your London manners and your inheritance papers. You presume much, sir," she counted, stepping closer. The scent of him hit her. Rain, cedarwood, and the sharp tang of ink. It was an intoxicatingly masculine scent that felt dangerously out of place amidst the smell of decay. "I am here because she was my blood. Whatever she left behind, I have a right to see it." "Secrets," Gideon scoffed, leaning in. His shadow loomed large against the flickering candlelight of the hall. "You think this is a Gothic novel, Miss Effington? There are no ghosts here, only bones and the harsh reality of natural philosophy." The tension between them was a physical weight, a tether pulled taut. His gaze dropped to her mouth for a heartbeat, a lapse in his armour, before he jerked his head towards the stairs. "Your rooms are in the east wing. I suggest you stay there. This house is a labyrinth, and I have not the time to fish you out of a specimen jar." Before Cassandra could deliver the scathing retort blooming on her tongue, a violent pounding erupted at the front door. Gideon frowned, crossing the hall in 3 long strides. He wrenched the door open. No one stood there, only the howling wind and a small, sodden envelope pinned to the wood with a tarnished silver dagger. Cassandra watched, her heart hammering against her ribs, as Gideon pulled the blade free. He tore open the envelope, his face draining of colour as he read the single line of elegant, spidery script.
"What is it?" she whispered, moving to his side. Gideon crumpled the parchment in his fist, his knuckles turning white. He looked at her, and for the first time the hostility in his eyes was replaced by something far more unsettling, genuine alarm. "It seems," he said, his voice tight, "that someone believes our inheritance is worth killing for. Welcome to Blackheath, Cassandra. I hope you brought your courage." The rain did not merely fall, it besieged the house, lashing against the stone walls until the windows rattled in their frames. Inside, the library was a cavern of amber light and long dancing shadows, the air thick with the scent of beeswax and the dust of 1,000 forgotten thoughts. Gideon Rokesby sat at a sprawling oak desk, his cravat discarded, the top buttons of his shirt undone. He looked less like a scholar and more like a man of action forced into a life of quiet study. Across from him, Cassandra felt the oppressive weight of the silence. Every time she looked up, she found his grey eyes fixed on her, sharp with a suspicion she found increasingly difficult to distinguish from interest. "These journals," Cassandra said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her fingers as she turned a page of Hester's vellum notebook. "They are not just botanical observations, Mr. Rokesby. Look at the dates. She was tracking families, lineages, bloodlines in the village." Gideon leaned forward, his shoulder brushing hers as he peered at the cramped, spidery script. The heat radiating from him was a sudden, intoxicating intrusion. "Natural philosophy often strays into the study of heredity," he muttered, though his brow furrowed. Hester believed that character, vices, virtues, even tendencies of the mind, was as predictable as the colour of a rose. She called it the geometry of the soul. "She has marked our names here," Cassandra whispered, pointing to a page where Effington and Rokesby were joined by a series of jagged, cryptic symbols, linked with a mathematical precision that feels clinical. Hester was many things, but she was never cold, Gideon counted, his voice dropping. He reached out, his large hand covering Cassandra's on the page. His skin was rough, calloused from years of handling glass and soil, yet his touch sent a jolt through her. She did not pull away. The air in the room seemed to vanish, replaced by a suffocating magnetic tension. Outside, a crack of thunder shook the floorboards, and the candles flickered. In the sudden gloom, Gideon's face was a study in rugged angles, the sharp line of his jaw, the heavy brow, the mouth that looked as though it had not known a kind word in years. "Why do you look at me as if I am the enemy?" she breathed. "Because you are a distraction I cannot afford," Gideon rasped. He stood abruptly, the chair scraping harshly against the floor. He paced the length of the room, his movements restless. "I have spent my life in the service of Hester's work, thinking I was her protégé, but these journals, they suggest I was merely another subject of her study. And now you arrive, your likeness echoing the portraits of the women who feature in her notes." He stopped before a towering mahogany bookcase, his back to her. "Trust is a luxury in this house, Miss Effington. My life has been one of isolation and study. I do not know what to make of a woman who smells of jasmine and defiance." Cassandra rose, her silk skirts hissing. "Then perhaps you should stop looking at me as a subject and start looking at me as an ally. Someone sent that note. Someone is watching this house." She reached for a heavy leather-bound volume on the shelf, intending to show him another entry, but as she pulled the spine, there was no resistance. Instead, a heavy thunk echoed behind the wood.
A section of the shelving swung inward, revealing a dark, yawning aperture. The air that wafted from the hidden passage was different, sterile, sharp with the scent of vinegar and chemicals. Gideon was at her side in an instant, a silver candelabra held high. "She never told me," he whispered, a flash of hurt crossing his features. 10 years, and she kept this from me. They descended a narrow stone staircase, their shoulders touching in the cramped space. At the bottom lay a laboratory that looked like something from a fever dream. Long benches were crowded with electrical apparatus, copper wires, and rows of glass slides. But it was the back wall that arrested Cassandra's breath. Huge, floor-to-ceiling charts depicted human anatomy, but overlaid with strange metallic ink. And in the center, 2 pedestals held glass jars. One contained a lock of golden hair, Cassandra's mother's shade. The other held a ring Gideon wore on his smallest finger, a Rokesby heirloom Hester had claimed was lost years ago. "This was not just research," Cassandra said, her voice trembling. "This was an obsession. She was not just studying heredity, Gideon. She was trying to understand it, to trace its every thread." Gideon stepped toward the central table, where a final journal lay open. He began to read, his face turning ashen. "She writes of a great work, a confluence of 2 lines." He looked up at Cassandra, his eyes wide with a sudden dawning horror. "She did not just leave us this house. She orchestrated our arrival. Every letter, every invitation, it was all her design." As the realization sank in, the feeling of being watched intensified. The shadows in the corner of the lab seemed to lengthen, and for the first time, Cassandra realized that the threat outside the house was nothing compared to the legacy Hester had sealed within the walls. The morning arrived not with the clarity of sunlight, but with a thick, suffocating fog that clung to the windows of Blackheath like a burial shroud. Inside the library, the air felt charged, the silence between Cassandra and Gideon no longer one of budding attraction, but of a jagged, terrifying uncertainty. The sound of a carriage, the sharp, rhythmic clip-clop of well-bred horses, shattered the stillness. Gideon was on his feet in an instant, his hand instinctively reaching for the heavy iron poker by the hearth. "Stay behind me," he commanded, his voice a low growl of protection. The man who entered the drawing room was the antithesis of the wild moor outside. Lord Julian Vane was a vision of London sophistication, his charcoal grey coat tailored to perfection. He held a gold-topped cane with the casual grace of a man who owned everything he surveyed. "Ah, the inhabitants of the menagerie," Vane said, his voice a smooth, cultured purr. He did not wait for an invitation. He simply strolled to the center of the room, his gaze sweeping over the specimen jars with a sneer. Hester always did have a penchant for the grotesque. "Lord Vane," Gideon said, his body taut, "I assume you are the coward who pins daggers to doors." Vane laughed, a dry, hollow sound. "A bit of theatre to ensure I had your attention. I am here for the journals, Rokesby, specifically the ones regarding certain lineages, Hester's little obsession with the qualities of noble blood." "The research belongs to the estate," Cassandra said, stepping out from behind Gideon, her chin high. "It is not for sale." Vane turned his icy blue eyes toward her, and a slow, predatory smile spread across his face. "Ah, the lovely Miss Effington. You truly have no idea, do you? Hester was not just a naturalist. She was a matchmaker of the most clandestine sort. She sought to prove that certain traits could be predicted, even cultivated, by blending the right elements. She spent decades searching for the lost branches of the Earl of Ashworth's line, a title currently in abeyance. Vane's smile sharpened. But she did not just find the branches, she brought them here. Tell me, Rokesby, did you never wonder why you have no memory of your parents? Why you were rescued from an orphanage that burned with all its records? Gideon's face went deathly pale. "Speak plainly. You and Miss Effington share more than a roof," Vane whispered. "You share a father. The late Lord Ashworth had a penchant for women below his station. Hester gathered his byblows and brought you here to observe the bloodline. You are not lovers in the making. You are half-siblings. The world seemed to tilt. Cassandra felt the blood drain from her face, a dizzying nausea rising in her throat. She looked at Gideon, at the man whose touch she had craved only hours ago. Now his eyes reflected her own horror. "It is a lie," Gideon rasped, though his voice lacked conviction. He looked at the journals, the symbols Hester had drawn. They suddenly took on a new, terrible clarity. "Is it?" Vane countered. "I have the baptismal records Hester procured. I have proof of your shared paternity. Give me the research, the data that details the Ashworth line, and I can use it to petition the Crown. I will give you enough money to disappear. Separately, of course." Vane leaned in. "Or I can reveal the truth to the Ton. Imagine the scandal. The scientific siblings of Blackheath. You will be ruined."
Cassandra looked at Gideon, and for the first time he did not look back. He looked broken. "We need a moment," Cassandra whispered, her voice cracking. "Take your time," Vane said, moving toward the sideboard. "But remember, I am the only one offering to carry this burden for you." The silence in the laboratory was the hollow, echoing silence of a tomb. Gideon stood by the table, his silhouette jagged against the flickering candlelight. Cassandra stayed near the door, feeling as though a physical blade had been driven between them. "He is waiting for an answer," Cassandra whispered. "He is waiting for a surrender," Gideon snapped. He lunged for the final journal. He began flipping through the pages with a manic intensity. Hester was a woman of precision. If she were documenting a lineage, she would not rely on parish records alone, not when she could examine the blood itself. He stopped. His finger froze on a page dated only 6 months prior. His breath hitched. "The blood samples," he muttered. "She took them from me when I had the fever last winter, and she took yours from that needle prick on the day you arrived. Gideon?" "Look," he beckoned her over, his voice trembling. She mapped the traits. "Look at the markers for the Ashworth line, the haemophilia, the ocular weakness. I carry none of it, but more importantly," he pointed to a complex grid, "she compared our blood. She writes here, 'The deception is complete. Let the world believe they are of one root, for only in that shadow can they be hidden from Vane's reach.'" Cassandra's heart gave a violent thud. A deception. "She did not create an experiment, Cassandra. She created a sanctuary," Gideon said, his eyes finally meeting hers, burning with a fierce sudden hope.
"You are an Effington by blood, but I am no Rokesby. I am the son of her true love, a man Vane murdered. She lied to the world to keep Vane from realizing I was the rightful heir to the lands he covets. She knew if he thought we were siblings, he would think the line was stagnant. He would not see me as a threat. So we are nothing to each other by blood," Gideon breathed, taking a step toward her, "and everything by choice." The heavy thud of boots echoed on the stone stairs. Lord Vane appeared in the doorway, the silver dagger held loosely in his hand. "Time is up. The journals, if you please." Gideon turned, his expression shifting into a mask of cold calm. He reached for a copper lever mounted to the side of a central cabinet. "You wanted the great work, Vane?" Gideon asked, his voice echoing. Hester understood that the most effective defense in nature is often the most overlooked. With a sharp tug, Gideon threw the lever. A series of hidden weights groaned within the walls. Suddenly, the glass-fronted cabinets lining the room tilted. A fine, shimmering powder, Hester's concentrated botanical spores, poured from the ceiling in a suffocating cloud. At the same moment, a heavy iron door slammed shut, triggered by the same mechanism, locking Vane inside the center of the lab. Vane coughed, clutching his throat, as the irritant dust filled his lungs. He lunged for the door, but it was locked fast. "The constable is already on his way," Gideon shouted through a viewing portal. "I sent word the moment I saw your carriage.
They will find you with the stolen records and the weapon you used to threaten us. Hester's notes on your father's accidental death are tucked right behind the ones you were so eager to steal."
Gideon turned back to Cassandra. The chaos of the room seemed to fade. He reached out, his hand cupping her cheek with a tenderness that broke what was left of her composure. "She gave us a legacy of lies," he whispered, his thumb brushing over her lower lip. "But she gave us the truth in the end. I have nothing but this crumbling house, and a name that is not mine." "You have me," Cassandra replied, her hands finding the lapels of his coat, pulling him closer until the scent of rain and ink enveloped her entirely. "And I suspect that is the only inheritance Hester ever truly intended for us to claim." He kissed her then, a desperate, starving collision that tasted of salt and liberation. It was a kiss that burned away the constraints of propriety and the ghosts of Blackheath. As the first true ray of morning light pierced the fog of the moors, Blackheath stood silent. The jars were still, the specimens remained in their glass prisons, and the secrets of Aunt Hester were finally laid to rest. In the heart of the library, two shadows moved as one, no longer subjects in a careful study, but architects of a future written in their own hand. For in the geometry of the soul, the shortest distance between 2 points is never blood, but the courage to belong to another.